talked about earlier. So I guess just just quick poll. What were the primitive data types that we talked about, or what are the primitive data types in JavaScript? Okay, numbers, strings, booleans. What else? Not functions. Uh, yeah. Well, everything's a value, right? It's just a matter of what type it is. Yeah. So I mean the primitives were strings, numbers, and booleans, the three big ones. You have nulls, you have undefined, and then you have like probably one other one I'm blanking on right now. Nan is a number. Zero is a number. What's it? Six primitive. Uh, Boolean, strings, numbers, symbols. Oh, oh yeah. Okay, that's what symbols. They definitely took that from Ruby. Anywho, the point is like those are the primitives, right? So what were the non-primitives? Arrays, objects. Functions were one. Yep. Yeah, and so we've talked about arrays over two lectures. We've talked about objects over two lectures, and the third really big one that we want to talk about is functions, and we'll probably cover these over two lectures as well. So, so normally when we talk about functions, right, the idea is like we write a function and then we run it. But because in JavaScript they're also what data type? They are complex, but that's not what they're called. Or if I do type of if I do type of and give it a function, what do I get? Object, right? Because all non-primitives in JavaScript are quote unquote objects, right? So a function is also an object. Um, and so in the same way that we kind of easily pass along an array from one function to another, or we pass an object from one thing to another, we can actually treat functions in very much the same way. Whoa, like mind blown, right? So functions in JavaScript are what we call first-class objects, but that just means that you can treat it like you do an array or an object. Let me just zoom in a little bit here. Okay, well that didn't help. Great. Okay, this won't go away, will it? See if I can. I don't know how to hide the slide layout here. View. Oh, all right, whatever. Oh, there we go. There we go. Yeah. Yeah. So here on in the example on the right, right? Um, we can pretty much like I guess the idea here is that uh, on the second line here we're creating this function called myfunc, right? So variable. It's called myfunc, and we're putting it in an array. And when we log out what is at the index, we get a function called myfunc. And most importantly, on the last line there, we can actually also execute that function too, right? Like we would any other function. We invoke it by using the open and close parentheses because that is the only way for us to invoke a function in JavaScript. Um, and so I guess the short of it is that like in this case we see that functions are treated very much like objects, like arrays, really, in that we can use it, we can store it, we can pass it back and forth, we can get it back from other functions, etc. So yeah, so functions, not that different, even though we up until this point we kind of treated them as kind of like an entirely separate entity. Oh, no, that's just how they show that. No, that's just a function. Yeah, like, it's an array with one element, and that element is a I think they do that to let you know what type it is and then tell you like because otherwise JavaScript, I think JavaScript does it. I mean, the idea there is that like like it tries to tell you kind of what it thinks you probably need to know. So that's definitely not a key value pair in the traditional sense. I just want you to know that this is a function, and the function is called myfunc. Right? Because if it gave you just one or the other, it might not be useful. Like if it gave you just function, like well, which function is it? If it gave you just myfunc, you're like yeah, and if it gave you just func, you're like well, what's myfunc? Yeah, Becky. Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so it wouldn't invoke it. It wouldn't run the function. It would
Yep.
just tell you what. It would just tell you what's there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. In JavaScript, the only way to invoke function is with open and close parentheses. If that's not there, the function will never run. Always. Yeah.
All it makes since we except for the second one, we returned from another function. What does that mean?
Yeah. We'll get there. You'll see some.
Okay.
You'll see some. You'll see some cases of returning functions. Okay. Oh god. Oops. Okay, I get it. Calm down. Oh my god. Is this okay? I think it's because I'm in edit mode and not like present mode. All right. There we go. Okay. Cool. As you can tell, if functions are just objects, then we can pass them to and from other things like objects, right? In the last slide, we stored it as an array. Here, we're passing one function into another function. So on line 1, we create a function called callback. On line 2, we create a function on line 5, we create a function called funcRunner. Callback function is very simple, just logs back a string, right? Extremely straightforward. FuncRunner, what it does is it also logs out a string, but it also takes in the function that's being passed to it, and it does what in line 7 there? It invokes it. It actually runs the function that you give it, right? And so this is a function that runs a function. So on line 10 there, when I actually run that line, right? So up until line 10, so lines 1 through 9, I'm just defining stuff, right? Like nothing's happening, nothing's being executed. It's just all like this is what this is, this is what this is, right? Line 10 is kind of the first instance where like something happens, something is actually being run. And in this case, on line 10, we're running funcRunner, and we're passing as the argument callback. Now, callback on line 10 is the same as callback on line 1, right? It's just a random function. We can call that foobar, we can call it whatever we want. But the important thing on line 10 is that we're running func. We're actually executing funcRunner, and we're passing it a function. When we run funcRunner, if we move from top down, line 6 runs first, right? Because we're running funcRunner. Line 6 says, okay, now I'm calling the CV or whatever it is. So that's why on line 12 we have that console logged out first. And then CB in this case is what? Where do we define what CB is? Yeah, we feed it. But essentially in this case, CB is line 1, right? It's that function with the name of callback. And so we just execute it. And then that's why console.log calling back prints out on line 13. And then after it does that, the callback function finishes up. And then we reach the end of the funcRunner function, so that finishes up, and we're done. So this is an example of us passing a function to another function to invoke it. Let's see. Oh yeah. So so really, like what the second bullet point is trying to tell you is that just because we give a function to another function doesn't mean we run that callback function or the function that's being passed in, right? The only place that's actually running the callback is on line 7. If line 7 wasn't there, then the callback function wouldn't run. It would just be like, here's a callback function, great, and then we do nothing with it if line 7 wasn't there, right? But line 7 is there, and so line 7 is the thing that actually runs the callback. We're good? Make sense? Yes? That's it.
Yeah, I just want to, it says CB though. Why wouldn't it say callback there?
Oh.
Function to call that.
I hate the fact that when I'm in present mode, I can't like highlight stuff. But it's because here we define a function, right? And CB is a parameter,
Right.
right? So we could call this function, like David new, right? We'll call this one David new, and this is still CB because CB is a parameter, right? So here we have basically, it's a basically saying like var CB equals, and in this case, it's equals David new. Right? It's just a parameter. Does that make sense, Dustin?
Yeah.
If it doesn't, let me know. We can kind of go through
Yeah,
more.
I'll just get it, but I just don't. I mean, yeah, I understand it's an argument that's coming through. I understand that, but I guess I don't quite get it. And then I understand. Okay, that's the argument. The argument saying call the function and use parentheses right behind it. But how does it know to go up? Okay, so it knows to go up to David New because you assigned it to David New on line 6, right?
The function is, yeah. Because remember how I guess probably this is okay. This is my local machine, so I don't need to feel about it. Remember how earlier, right? It's like if we have something like like var arr equals or we something like var new array equals 1, 2, 3, right? Here we just do we pass a new array, and then here this would be arr, and then we do like arr dot push, something, right? Well, it's the same exact principles here, right? It's like, yeah, we had this thing called new arr, and we're passing it into func_runner, and basically func_runner, whatever we pass into it, it will assign it the variable of arr because it's a parameter, and we just do stuff, right? So if you're comfortable with this, then this is the same exact principle. We were just replacing, really, we're just replacing names. Yeah, Becky.
So this is kind of tangential, but if so for func_runner, so I get like the parameter thing, but if you don't specifically, like, what happens if you don't, like, is there a difference between putting like return in front of CB? Like, what's the difference there by not having it? Does it still return the value with the function CB to func_runner, or like, is that just, I don't know. Are you understanding my question? So basically, I'm saying that like the function doesn't really return anything; it just runs the function. So
Yep.
is there any difference between returning it versus not returning it?
Well, it depends on what we want to get out of func_runner, right? Like, what is func_runner? Like, what do you want it to return, right? And if what you want it to return is whatever callback function returns, then you would need to return it. In this case, both functions just console log stuff out, so we're okay with just running it. It's the same idea where it's like how for example when we do slice or splice, right? What is if we do slice, right, without any arguments, what does that return?
Slice.
Or actually, let's talk about splice because we just did the example earlier today, right? What does splice return? Right, the items we took out, right? And if I wanted to have the items that were taken out, then I would return that value, right? I would capture it somewhere. But what does splice also do? It also changes the original array, right? So if I wanted to just change the original array and I don't really care about capturing the return value, then I'll just ignore the return. Right? Same here, right? It's like hey, if I just want to run the function, yeah, I'll just run it, and it does what I need to do, and I'm happy. If I actually need what's returned, then I'll capture it, right? Like .pop, right? Sometimes we say .pop because our goal is to just get rid of the last element in an array, right? Sometimes we say, hey, can you remove it? But I also want to know what was removed, and I want to do something with that value. In that case, we capture what's being returned, right? So running a function and returning a function, and running a function without caring about the return versus caring about the return is fully dependent on what your goal is here, right? In this case, both functions just console log stuff out, so we don't really care like what it returns, right? So we don't need to capture it.
You just want to see what's going on.
Well, I mean, so I guess without being too general, like in this example, right? What would func runner return if I did return CB here? Right. CB is going to console log out calling back, and it's going to give me back undefined because by default all functions return undefined. And I'll just say, right. So I'll just say, hey, return that undefined to me, right? The console logs wouldn't change. They were both still just console logs because once you get console logs purely for human consumption, right? Computers don't care about console logs at all. And then it will give back undefined, and I'll just return the undefined. In this case, I mean, like I just don't really care, right? Like that's why we don't do it. But we'll see a few examples in which we do care, and we'll probably do care about what's being returned. But whether or not you return something is purely based on like what you need. If you don't care about it, then don't do it, right? Like it's you definitely have that flexibility. And Lawrence, you have a question too.
Yeah. Are arguments parameters the same thing?
No. Oh, so argument is.
I hear that user once in a while when referring to like the same stuff that goes into parentheses.
Yeah. So argument is technically like what goes into a function, and then parameter is what you call that thing while you're inside the function.
So argument is everything that goes in, and parameter is a single instance of things.
No. So in this case, callback is the argument, and then CB is a parameter.
Oh, okay.
The parameter is what you call it inside of the function that you're in, or technically speaking, it's inside the scope that you're in. Cool. Any questions about passing functions into other functions? Great, because we're gonna do a lot more. Okay, so this function here, probably as simple as we can get, right, in terms of like a vanilla function. What happens when what happens when I run that log_s string and I pass in apples? Yeah, this is a function. It takes in a string and then it console logs that string, right? Pretty much as simple as we're possibly gonna get. Okay, so then we have this other function called calls func with hello, and it takes in a function, and oh no, Becky, it returns something, right? In addition to executing func, right? And we know we're executing func because on line 8 there, func is followed by open and close parentheses, right? We're actually executing func. So now when I run line 11, what do I get? I'm sorry? It will log hello. Okay. Any other guesses?
Oh, it's a function. Apples hello, I think no space.
Okay, so we have someone says hello. We have someone says apples hello with no space. We have undefined cache.
Well, so if we're calling it on line 11, we're calling the function on line 7. We're asking that function to return func. There's no function called func.
There is. On line 7, func is a parameter.
Oh, right.
Yep. It's just a variable.
So it should log. Oh, never mind. I'll change it to just log hello. Oh, sorry. We'll talk over there. It should log apples, I suppose.
You said it will just log out apples after we run line 11.
I think it logs hello, actually. Yeah.
Okay, so we kind of converged back on hello now. Someone said hello, and then everyone like, no.
No, I think it was log hello.
Okay, it will log hello return undefined. So, it's hello, right? If we walk through this, it's actually fairly straightforward, right? Because line 11. So after we call line 11, where do we go next in the function, or where do we go next on the page? Line 7, right? It's like, oh, we call func as hello, great, and we're passing in log a string as func, right? So on between line 7 and line 8 there, we can think of a variable called var func equals log a string. And then on line 8 there, it definitely does execute log a string, passes in hello, which just takes us to line 1 now. We go through it, console logs out whatever we passed in. So in this case, we passed in hello, it'll log out hello. And then Becky, you're right, we do return whatever that function returns, which is undefined. Because in log a string, we don't explicitly return anything. So this will log hello and return back undefined. All right, let's keep adding things. So a new function called add word or add world taking a string, and then we basically return back whatever string we give it plus space world. Okay. So now when we call, if we say result1 equals, add world, what a wonderful. I mean, what do we get when we get logged line 18 now? Yeah, hint. I mean, line 13 and line 13 through 18 has nothing to do with anything that comes before it, right? We just have a random function, and it just prepends the world, or no, appends world to whatever we pass it. So we pass in what a wonderful, and it gives back world. And then obviously our last guy, our last kind of like, hey, let's put everything together now. What does line 20 give, or line 21 give us? Okay. Any other guesses? Also, Becky, really quickly, just so we kind of close the loop on the returns, right? Notice how on line 17, we say var result1 equals add world, and what a wonderful. On line 14, we do return the string what a wonderful world, right? If we just console logged it out there and we never returned it, then on line 18, that will console log out undefined. Okay? But because we are returning the string on line 14 there, that's why on line 18 we are console logging out a variable. It stands for, or it represents what a wonderful world. So that's an example in which way we would want to use return if we actually want to capture the value and use it somewhere else. Okay, so back to line 21 there. What will result give us? Yeah, so let's just kind of walk through, right? So line 20 calls func with hello. Great. We're back on line 7 now. Func is this add world function. And then what we do is we execute func, which is add world, and we pass in the variable, we pass in the string hello. So now we're on line 13 now. And what is string on line 13 there? Hello, right? So line 13, we want to go to line 14. What's string plus or equal world?
Is there why is it hello? Because when was it? When did we actually pass it in? I mean, I know we did above, but is that one's in scope?
Does this work? Nice. Okay, cool. Okay, so let me just comment out all this right again. So let's just kind of walk through this line by line, right? Okay, so calls func with world, and we do add world, right? Okay, so the step 2 is where that takes us to now is line 8, where we return func, or return add world, and we're passing in hello. Right? Cool. And that takes us to where? Where am I, guys? So line 21 calls func with hello, takes me to line 8. Yeah, I'll say line 14 now, just to kind of get to like the action, so to speak. But yeah, what does line 14 tell me? Line 14 says to return, and what is string? Yeah, so it's return hello plus or equal hello plus or equal world.
Wait, so but on line 13 though, has it accepted anything?
Line 13 accepts whatever we called add world with.
Whatever we call.
Right. Which we did on line 8.
it inherits the argument from the previous function.
Okay. So once again, let's start from the beginning, right? On line 21, 22 now, I guess, we do call funcs with hello, right? And we pass in the function add world. So that takes us to where? Line, no,
Oh,
line 7, right? Great. So on line 7, there's something called func. So what is func equal to? Add world. Okay. So great. So then what's this? What's line 9 now become? What's line? What is func on line 9? I mean, I define for you on line 8.
Right. The function.
Right. So this is now just add world with hello. Good so far? Cool. So now we go back to line, what is it now? Line 14 now, right? What is string equal to? I'm sorry?
Hello.
Is that a guess or do you feel very confident about that answer?
It's funny when you know something but you don't feel confident about it. It's the weirdest.
Well, sure. I mean, like, so remember how, like, when we called add world directly, we say add world, we pass in a string, what a wonderful world, and everyone seemed pretty comfortable, like, oh, well, clearly if we call, add world and we pass in a string, then the string here is going to equal what a wonderful world. What a wonderful, right? So here, rather than calling it on line 19, right, add world, what a wonderful, we're calling it on here and this add world, and we're passing in hello. Same idea. So what's string equal to then? Hello. And then this is going to return a string called O. Yeah. Cool. And what does it return this to, or which line does it return this to?
Say that again.
Where does it return this to? So now we have a string, we return it, and who gets it, right? Return means we give you something, so who receives it? Not quite. Not yet. Nope. I'm sorry? So on line 16, we are returning hello world, right? My question is, who do we return it to, or where are we returning it to? Dennis? Line 3? 23. So yeah, so not quite right. Remember, what do we return where do functions return things to? Like in a general principle. Where they were called. Where that you cast? Yeah. Where they were called. So where do we call add world? Line number 9. Right? So line 16 returns hello world to here. So now we say, hey, this is no longer add world calling hello. This is now hello world. Right? Functions return back their value to whoever called it. Very fundamental to functions, right? They give it back to whoever called them. It's like you call a function and say, hey, can you figure something out for me? And the function says, yeah, I figured it out. Here you go, right? They give it back to whoever called it. It wouldn't just arbitrarily give it back to the universe, right? So in this case, we called add world from line 9. So that's where the results of the return value of add world is given back to in line 9. And now line 9 is returning the string called hello world. And who is and where are we returning that to? I'm sorry? 23. Yep, line number 23, right? Because now calls func with hello saying, great, I'm ready to return a value to you. Who asked for it again? And we're like, okay, well, we called. I'll delete this too. This is probably more trouble than it's worth now. On line 23, on line 21, I guess. We're like, oh, well, we called calls func with hello here, right? So let's return the value here. So now this becomes hello world. And then ta-da, we get to our magical console on line 22. Or so we stored the value of hello world on to the variable called result2. And so when we log out result2, we get hello world.
So it's following this chain like we're doing now that made the scope comments complicated.
Yeah. That was the point, I think. Oh, really? Wait, what? That's funky. Oh, so I was using Sean's repo, but then I guess when I started typing, it just kind of automatically made a new repo for me. Anywho, okay, does this make sense to folks? Right? I mean, it may be hard to watch me do it, but like you can also just the problem is just like don't be afraid to bust out pen and paper and start drawing arrows places, right? Like I think from what everyone's blank looks tell me, like I think the biggest gap here is just understanding that a function returns a value to whoever called it, right? After you call a function, if that function returns a value, if it makes it easier for you to understand, just like cross out like the line where you call the function and replace that with the value the function returns. Okay, so going back then to the slides, and so we get to this place now, and we console log hello world. There's a lot going on here. I don't know if me explaining at you is going to make any better. It may just become one of the things where you need to kind of look on your own and just kind of draw arrows and figure out. But is there anything fundamental that like is like still confusing to folks about like kind of the process here? Good. All right. So despite this only being like a 9-lecture slide, we're only like I think 3 slides in. Okay, so yeah, so this slide is I would say it's almost identical to the previous slide, except it's just like more. Okay, so I guess like on line 13, is there a REPL for this one too? Yep, there is. Okay, so let me go to the REPL really quick. Oh, in that one. No repo. Okay, so let's comment on this guy for now. Okay, so calc 10, 5, and add. Okay, so lines 1 through 12 are just like definitions, right? We never call anything. Line 13 is the first place where we actually try to call a function, right? So we call calc, and so where does that take us to if we call calc on line 13 there? Sorry? Line 9. Okay, great. And so let's just, do this little somewhat silly, but let's just be really verbose here. What does var num1 equal? What does var num2 equal? And what's calc, right? Because those are my parameters. So by this point, those do have values. It's a matter of what are they. Var num is 10, var 2 is 5, and then what's CB? Add. All right. I'll say, add, which is a function, line 1. Okay. Oh, God. Okay. Everyone goes so far?
So CB, is that the common notation for callback?
No, we can call it something else. We can call it like, I don't know.
I mean, is that probably why they use that? Is
Um,
that a callback function?
So terminology-wise, any function that's being passed in a null function is called a callback function. But like, I don't necessarily like the use of it as a variable name for teaching because I feel like it makes things more confusing, not less. Because now you have this kind of best practice tied in with like a technical definition. So if you guys want, we can call this something else too to make it easier to understand.
I mean, CB might work. I mean, the only reason why I'm
Okay, cool.
I know what you're saying though. It's like don't automatically assume that because it might not be right.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, okay, so everyone good right now? Everyone good with how we got to this point here? Okay, so now on line 13, we call CB and we pass in num1 and num2. What's CB again? So what is this? So rewrite this line for me here on line 13. Return, yep, add 10, comma, 5 or 15? 5. Everyone good so far? This is identical to what comes before it, right? Now I'm just filling the blanks for you. Okay, great. So this takes us to where now? Line 1, yay. Okay. What's num1 and num2? Hopefully folks are getting this one pretty easily, right? Num1, num2, we haven't changed it. It's still 10. I mean, so, okay, so let's just be very, very clear. Num1 in this scope, different than num2 in this scope, right? In this case, they both happen to be called num1s, and they both happen to have the same values, but we can call this, like David1 or David2, right? And like this has zero bearing on the actual, like these two scopes are like separate, right? Like, so in this case, I'll do it this way just to make sure that we're like very clear that those two are like the num1 and num2 are not related. Dave? So David1 is 10, David2 is 5. So what is line 14? Like, what's a translation of that? Return 15, right? Return is super important, right? If you just write 15 down, JavaScript doesn't quite know how to handle that. So return 15. Okay, great, awesome. So we're done, right? We're done with like we got to a primitive really, and we're done. We got to return something. So so where do we go now? Where do we go from line 4?
To the console.
Nope.
We're returning it to line 15.
Yeah, right. Because where do we return things to? Where they were called, and where do we call the add function? Right. So like I said, like so once this function is resolved, now let's just cross this off, and by crossing it off, in this case, I'll delete it, and I'll replace it with the value that was returned, right? The idea is that like this is now the same, right? So cool. So now on line 15, we have this return 15 now. Where do we go next?
Returning it to line 18.
Yeah, exactly, right? Because we're calc is like, okay, great, I'm ready to return a number to you, and the idea is like, okay, so who called calc? Oh, we called it on line 18, right? So here, this is just going to be, so sum is now, or thank you. Yeah. So that's where we're at. Any questions? Make sense? Good. Yeah. And then I won't walk through subtract, but it's literally the same exact step, except we go through line to line 7 instead of line 1. Same concept. Feel free to go through it on your own. But this is a workflow. Okay, cool. So any other questions on I guess another example of callbacks? You're good? All right. So now we kind of get into something that's like somewhat important, but also maybe not. And the reason why I say is because now we're just kind of trying to see like callbacks kind of in action, in terms of in like a real world scenario. And the reason why I say it may not be as useful to you is because here we're using something called set interval. Something that you'll probably need to know eventually, but like it's like a very specific use case, right? It's just like an example. It's like something just very specific. What set interval does is, like I said, it's a real world use case, and what set interval does, it takes in 2 arguments. The first argument is a callback function. We know what that is. We call it a callback function. It's really just what? Another function. That's all it is, right? The fact that we call it a callback indicates that this is being put into another function to be used, but really it's just a function, right? That's nothing special about it. And the second argument it takes in is a number, and that number is going to represent a number of milliseconds. And what a set interval does is every that number of milliseconds, it will execute the function, the callback function. right? So if I want to just create like a timer, right? I say, hey, like every second, just log out for me. How many seconds have passed? I would just um, the first argument will be a callback that also logs out number of seconds, and then the second argument will be 1,000 to know that every 1,000 milliseconds, every 1 second, to log that out. And so this is just in this case a very kind of just like a very kind of I guess real world, more practical example of 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 when we use callback functions. Becky,
So is that interval kind of like a keyword in a sense for
it's a reserve word, as in,
reserve word? Yeah.
or sorry, it's not technically a reserve word, and the reason why I say that is because reserve word means you can't override it. I think you are able to overwrite set interval, but it does like kind of come standard, I guess, if you will, in JavaScript.
In the real world, this is used so that another piece of code at the time to give you what you want or something like that.
No,
Another operation.
well, no. So usually that's something. Usually, if you want to wait for an piece of code to run and get you some fetch information, you actually want to have that be dependent on when you get a response. So it's a little bit different. Set interval usually is more for counter time based purposes. If you're like like hey like every 5 seconds check to see if anyone new logged into the system, right? Or if someone or you could be like oh those menus are like, hey, are you still logged in? If not, I'll log you out. Like you could just have a variable that's like hey, if like every 5 seconds check to see the person use the page or not. If they haven't, like sort of message, right? So this is more like fixed time based. Yeah. Yeah.
When you call set interval, is it going to be essentially like executed once, or it's going to call itself?
I'm sorry.
When you call set interval
Yep.
function, is it going to keep calling itself, or this is just one time?
Set interval is only going to execute once, but it's going to call log counter every X milliseconds indefinitely. In this case, log counter is a callback function, so it executes that indefinitely, and we'll talk about what are some ways for us to kind of eventually kill it, but for now at least, just set interval only executes once. And in fact, it's actually a very common mistake where sometimes people think, oh, I'll call set interval every 1,000 seconds, and like that just means you're calling a function that's going to call something else indefinitely, so you have this like kind of flood of a lot of different calls, and usually most computers will probably stop you at a certain point. But yeah, set interval only runs once. Log counter is what gets called over and over again. Think of set interval as a function that starts running and never really stops. So it only needs to run once.
If you want to stop the set interval, you have to pass like the base case and
Yeah. There's like a few ways to stop set intervals. We probably won't talk about it in this class because like I said, like set interval is more of a tool, like just like hey, here's a real example we use a callback. Using set intervals is kind of a different story though. Any questions on this? Cool. And if not, yay, Becky's favorite topic now. So okay, so returning stuff. How do we return a function? This is the one that's going to get like really kind of well. So this and the next slide are the two that I think where this kind of really gets tricky, right? Is right up until now we've only returned values, right? But like we discussed in the first 10 minutes of class, like functions are objects. They're also values, so we can also return functions, right? And so when we return a function, so let's just take a look at this example here on the top gray pane. We have this function called genGreeter, and it returns a function that console logs out hello friends. So on the second line there, when we say var a greeter equals genGreeter execution, actually no, I'm just gonna copy and paste this code in Rebel for us because I feel like we're probably gonna walk through this one. Okay, so line 1 through 7 definition, nothing happens. Cool, we move on. Line 8, we execute genGreeter. Okay, so this takes us to line 1 now, right? genGreeter takes no inputs, so we don't really have any parameters, and it returns this function that console logs out hello friends. So it returns this function. Sorry, this I guess essentially is return function. Where are we returning the function to? Returning to line 7, right? Because we return things to whoever called it. So where do we call GenGreeter? Line 7, right? So now this is just, I'll cross this out. Actually, no, I'll just put a comment. Var a greeter equals function. And if I want to be even more specific, it's function that console to hello friend, right? So this means that, hey, var a greeter, it's now just a function. And so on line 9 there, because var a greeter is a function, on line 9 we can actually execute a function, right? So when we execute a function, when we execute the function on line 9 there, this function is what actually runs. And that's why we get console log out of hello friend. Yes? Good? Makes sense? Right? A very simple example of kind of just, if we get out of the mindset that functions something really special and magical and they're just another variable or another like value, then I think this will make a lot more sense.
So you can have an unnamed function that takes no arguments, because that's effectively what's happening in 2.
Yeah. I mean, we see it all the time, right? When we do, array.pop, we don't pass anything.
Yeah, I thought that was just like some weird JavaScript.
No, I mean it's just a function, right? Right. So yeah. So in this case, we use a variable generator so we can create this anonymous function. We call it anonymous function if it doesn't have quote unquote a name, so to speak.
Which returns another anonymous function.
Yeah. Yep.
For a second, I thought it's calling itself, but then no, it's just those two things. Those are two separate but connected things.
Yep. Exactly. So here we can also rewrite this as something like GenGreeter. We can do like var Justin's function equals this guy here, and then we return Justin's function. Same idea. Becky?
So just to reiterate, I know I can ask this before, but so like say you just said on line 10, pair a greeter equals shape greeter without the parentheses, what would happen?
Yeah. Let's that's gonna break. Let's console.log out a greeter. What do you think we're gonna get, guys?
It's only an I, so I'm sure it'll still do its thing.
Sorry, what?
We're only getting an I as opposed
Oh.
to like a scarier.
Sure.
That's why.
Oh no, the I means I'm missing a semicolon
Oh, okay.
everywhere. Do as I say, not as I do. Okay, so what do you think line 11 is gonna console log to us?
But it won't call the function, right? Because you have to have a parentheses about the function.
Right. So Becky's question is, what does line 11 console log to us?
Undefined.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other guesses? Does everyone think it's undefined?
Oh, it's going to be a string, a greeter.
But it's not even close.
Oh.
Right? I mean, if it's
Kaz, what do you think the answer is going to be? What do you think line 11 is going to console log?
I think it's going to print hello friend and then undefined.
Would it print out like the notation that was like function a greeter?
Oh, maybe GenGreeter and string.
Okay, so we went from one answer to like 8 answers now. Okay, so usually when I teach pass by value, I make use of the whiteboard. I think it just makes people like a lot more clear about what's going on. In this case, I'll find a whiteboard. So far, I don't think anyone's got it right yet. That's why I think we did go with that. This isn't what that. Okay, so just lay this.
Oh, it's hello friend twice with those type of lines. Am I close?
No.
George.
Just randomly, just randomly call words.
What is the second word? Okay. So the way that I usually try to help people visualize what pass by reference versus pass by value looks like. Um, virus, right? Didn't sound like virus. Okay, so the way that I usually help people visualize pass by reference versus pass by value is you kind of have this like line in the middle, and on one side you have kind of this variable, and on the other side you have this value, right? So when I say something like like var x equals 6, the idea is that you have a variable called x, and you have a value 6, right? And there's an arrow from x pointing to 6, which means that whenever I use x, I'm essentially using 6. Good? Nothing grammar so far. Awesome. Right? And so the idea is that if I have something called var y is equal to 6, I now have a variable called y. I also have this variable called 6. Let's just say that there's another value called 6. Okay? That's y equals 6 and x equals 6, right? If, on the other hand, if I said, var y equals x, the idea behind a pass by is this pass by value or pass by reference, by the way? Pass by value, right? Because 6 is primitive. So what this means is when it comes to 6, because it's a primitive, we actually create a copy of 6 down here, and we draw the arrows to that. So now this x equals 6 is unaffected by y equals 6, right? They're almost like independent because x is referring to its copy of 6, y is referring to another copy of 6. Pass by value in a nutshell, right? Pass by reference, on the other hand, if I have var a is equal to an array of 1, 2, well, a is equal to this 1, 2, and then if I do var b equals a, it's passed by reference. Passed by reference, right? Which means we don't create a copy. We actually draw an arrow from the variable to the shared value. So if I change this and I say, hey, let's add a 3 to the end of it, that will change both a and b. Make sense? Diagram-wise? Cool. All right. Awesome. So the reason why I'm taking this tangent is this found here. Line 10. A greeter is equal to, sorry, I should read back here. Okay. Gen greeter. What is that equal to? That's a variable, right? Because on line 1 it's like var gen greeter equals. So what's the value here? Yeah, I'll just call it a function, okay? Okay, and then on line 10 there, I have something called a greeter. And it's pointing to what? Sorry? Okay, but what's the value? Right? Right. So J greater points to this function. And is this pass by value or pass by reference? It's a function, right? It's a number, right? So this do this. Great. So now when I console log out a greeter, what do I get? Yeah. And then when we do that, ta-da! It's just a function, right? I guess in this case, the syntax didn't tell you what the name of it was called because it's an anonymous function. But yeah, but I mean, I guess that's where I was going with this whole kind of telling you guys really weren't close because in every example you guys talked about, you guys are all like, well, it was console log out hello friend or whatever it is. It's like, but we never, there's no execution here, right? We're just making up random variables and pointing them to values. There's no execution. variable points to a function. If I set another variable equal to it, it'll just point to the same function.
Why does it return? Why does it log an array?
Why does it log an array?
Some practice.
Oh, that's just like how they denote function. If let's do this. Probably a little bit easier. Oh no, this will tell you it's a. Oh wait, whoa, that's cool. Okay, that's fun. I thought it would tell you it's an object, but whatever. It's a function.
What did you put on line 1 for gen reader equals David function? Would it still just return? I mean, the type of function, but if we.
Yeah. This should now say function David. Yep. It's like that's not like an array in the sense that we know array, so just ignore that. That's just JavaScript trying to give you as much info as possible about like what you're looking at. It's not a traditional array by any means. Yvonne or Cash, they want to get some question?
How do you invoke
How do I invoke GenGreeter? Where? How do I invoke any?
If you want to run everything that's inside GenGreeter.
Yep. How do I invoke any function, Yvonne?
What?
How do I invoke any function? Okay, great. So, I mean, where does it look like we should be running the function then? On this page right now. You don't think we should? Yeah, great. Okay, so I deleted everything, right? We define our function here. What should I type right now to run GenGreeter? Yeah, there you go. That's it, right? Although, so let me just. This is a naming thing. Like I'll call it actually Yvonne. Right. So what's GenGreeter returning? Nope. There's clearly a return here in the GenGreeter function. So line 10, we invoke GenGreeter, right?
It's basically telling us that there's a function with a variable, the function Yvonne, but it's not running.
Why didn't it execute?
Where do we execute it?
So it's just telling us that it exists, right?
Yeah. Remember, like just open and close parentheses. The only way in JavaScript to execute functions. If there's no open and close parentheses, nothing's running. We can draw all the arrows. We can make them all the variable names that we want. That's all good. Until we see an open and close parentheses, nothing is being run. Right? So in this case, the only open and close parentheses that we see for the purpose of running a function are on line 10, right? So we run GenGreeter. GenGreeter, okay, great. Line 3, we say, hey, I have this variable. It stands for this function. Okay, cool. Line 7, here's a function. And so on line 10 says, okay, so when we return Justin's function, we return Justin's function, which is actually a function called actually Ivan. And then so then when we return this back to the page, GenGreeter says, okay, great, GenGreeter is now actually Ivan. And so the page default, the console like returns it to us and just tells us, okay, great, you're now a function called actually Ivan. And that's pretty much it. I'm sorry? Yeah, it would if we actually run it anywhere. But where do you see us running actually, Ivan? Okay, so walk me through where we see actually Ivan with open and closed parentheses after it. So how do we run a function, Ivan or Ivan? Yep. Uh, okay, great. So let's do this. Okay, Ivan, come up here. You heard me. Okay, so that code right there, what's executing on the page? What's running?
Wait, what?
What's running on this page right now? If I execute that code, what do I get? What is being executed right now?
Nothing. We're not calling anything.
Okay, great. So we're not calling GenGreeter, right? But I thought I defined what GenGreeter was.
Yeah, you did.
But why isn't it running?
Because we're not invoking it.
Okay, great. So what we're saying is we need something like GenGreeter here to actually run it, right? Okay, great. So now walk me through line by line what's happening when I invoke GenGreeter.
I think it happens is that by invoking this,
Yep.
we're invoking function data.
Yep, cool. So
And
that's good.
function data is all listed.
Okay, well, so let's go line by line here. So we're on line 3 now. So walk me through what's happening on line 3.
Line 3, you are declaring the variable justin function.
Yep.
And you are assigning it the value of the function.
Yep.
We are not. Okay, this is where I'm confused then, because if you are returning justin function, it means that you are invoking it or not?
How do you invoke a function?
With the parentheses.
Do you see open close parentheses there?
No. So how do you return anything if you're not invoking this function? How can you return it?
Okay, so maybe let's put this in here. Let's say return hi Ivan. Okay. So maybe this will help. So let's do shoot. Okay. So in this case, if I console log out GenGreeter, what is this going to give me?
Visual before it gives you a new function.
Okay. Let's check. Cool. Gives me a function, right? Actually, Ivan. Great. Hey, let's actually invoke this function. Now, what does this give me? Right. Okay. So do you see the difference now between why we return it without invoking it and why we return it after invoking it?
So what is it doing without the parentheses?
Like
I know the result. I'm just looking at it.
Good.
For what?
It's like the same problem with the very first statement when we forgot to just turn on the lowercase, and it just said it returned, okay, this function exists, but it's not calling it.
I don't remember anything from the presentation.
The only reason I remember is because you said it a couple times too. You brought it back up.
I understand what is going on, but I don't.
Maybe it's because actually, I initially kind of saw what you were saying, but those parentheses after actually Ivan, that's just the declaration. It's not the implication.
So I guess to answer Ivan's question or Mon's question of why do we actually want to return a function that we don't call? Because what if I don't want to call it right away? Right. So in this case, if I want to say hi Ivan and you're not in the classroom, it's kind of stupid, right? But I want to create a function that says, hey, once he walks in, say hi, right? So we walk through this illustrative narrative of Ivan walks into class, and then we say, hi Ivan, right? I can queue up this function. I can create this variable and just leave it there. And whenever I ready to use it, I'll use it. Right? I don't have to use it right away. And in fact, with most functions you create, you don't want to use it right away. You want to use it when it's appropriate. So now I have a function that says, hey, and so here's a really cool thing, right? So just bear with me here, right? Let's make this like really, really like flexible. Student name. And then we'll say here, we'll say hi plus student name. Greet Ivan equals 1 greater Ivan, and then greet Justin equals, oh shoot. And this is not a tangent because this is literally the next slide that we're going to talk about. Whoa. Hopefully you all see where this is going. Oh, dude, what's wrong? Oh, haha, I made a silly mistake. Oh, okay, whatever. Console.log, greet Ivan, and then console.log, greet Justin. Right? Prime examples of why I would want to create a function and not use it yet. Right? Because not only can I just hold on and use it later, but I can actually customize what I use it for. And so now, and this is a super, super common paradigm in programming, right? It's like, hey, let me create this function that can take something and give me back another version of a function that I can then use when appropriate. Yeah, so you can sit down if you want, but this is why I would sometimes want to return a function, and why sometimes I care about running it first and then returning it just.
I understand now. What I was thinking before, and this is what my mistake is that, for example, I was imagining that this is a variable, no? So imagine that this variable instead of being a function is a number, for example.
Yeah.
So we return just in number, for example, it would be 3. So we will return in 3. So I was thinking that if we, because of the result of invoking this function would be whatever.
Yeah.
By returning it, we will be returning the value, but it's not like that. We have to do that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we have to invoke it to get the value, right? Does this make sense, everyone? Good? Great, because this is going to take us right to the next slide, the second to last slide. Okay, yeah, so, yeah, this is okay. So back to our, like, fun discussion around closure, or sorry, around scope. Scope. So, who wants to define scope really quick? Lars?
Where variables can be accessed.
Yeah. It's basically like, it basically tells you, hey, between these curly braces, you have access to these things, right? So looking at this example, and I'll go back to the example we just walked through of greeting people. Here we have this, essentially it just looks like JGreeter pretty much, right? Like we have a function called makeGreeting, it's a function. And what it does is it has a var name equals Susie. And it gives you a function called greet, console hello name. Okay? Really important thing. Where does it get this name variable from? There's no name variable between these functions in this function scope. Exactly, right? So in this case, what this function says, like, okay, you want me to look for name. Do I have a variable called name? I don't. Do my parents do? In this case, yeah, it does, right? So I'll use that variable. If the parents doesn't, it'll say do their parents, do my grandparents do? And up until you get to the global scope, and there's no variable called name, you say, okay, you're calling something that doesn't exist, right? I'll throw an error at you. In this case, greet has access to variable name because name is in its parent scope. This is what we mean when we say the scope is defined by where the function is defined, right? The function is defined within this makeGreeting function. So therefore, this function has access to the variables in the makeGreeting scope. Yo.
Before we move on, can you explain why in the previous slide, in the last line, we have 2 parentheses?
Where? Oh, yeah, JGreeter. Sure. Yeah. So, actually, I'll tie in together with this one too. So let's go back to just Ivan walking into class. Okay, we'll get rid of Justin for now. So here I do something called like var greet Ivan. I pass in a variable called Ivan, and it gives me a function that I then run, right, to say hi Ivan. Instead, what I can also do here is say, hey, this is going to give me back a function, right? And then I'll just run it. Does that make sense? Right? So here, what I'm doing earlier, what I was doing earlier was I was saying, hey, var greet Ivan, and I'm saying, hey, by the way, let's run greet Ivan here. Right? Instead, what I'm saying is, alternatively, I can also just say, hey, gen greeter Ivan. Right? Because yeah. So remember, JavaScript executes left to right, right? So in this case, I'm running. So ignore this second parenthesis for now, right? I'm running gen greeter Ivan, which gives me back what? Up there. Nope. So line 12, gen greeter Ivan. Where does that take me to? Line 1, and then walk me through the rest of the function. I can make you come back up here again if you want. I can make you come back up here again. There is something like, so we're at line 12, right? We go line 1. Now what? Assuming this is not here. Assuming. Yeah. Cool. So let's just say this. Here, I'll write a comment that says, hey, greet Ivan is a function, we'll say, is the actually Ivan function, right? And that's why we execute greet Ivan. Here, down here, gen greeter returns actually Ivan function. So therefore, gen greeter executes, or actually I'll say invokes actually Ivan function. Yeah, doesn't no.
I guess I'm confused. I understood when we just had the parentheses, or we didn't, but now when you put, like, is it an argument now of Ivan going in? Why does that now, line 14, only return the function when we put an argument of Ivan into it?
Okay, yeah, sure. I guess you can take Ivan's place. So we call line 14. What happens next?
Say it again.
We execute the line 14. What happens next?
Okay, that's what I'm saying. Is it returns actually?
No, like walk me through line by line. We call line 14. What line does JavaScript go to next?
In order. Well, it's doing that on line 7, right?
So we call line 14. What happens next? What line do we go to next? What are we doing on line 14 there?
Oh, we're going up to number 1.
Okay, great.
Gen greeter, yeah.
And then, so walk me.
Yeah, that's my problem, is I don't know whether Ivan is an argument, whether it passes through to student name, because before when we didn't have Ivan there, we were just getting the acknowledgement that the function actually Ivan existed. But now we have, I'm calling it an argument, I guess that's what it is, of the name Ivan, and we're passing that in. Is that going into student name, which is after David? David, so if I put that into that,
Okay, so I think you're like let's just take it simpler. Like I think you're like you probably took like a wrong like turn like on an earlier step, and that's why like where you end up doesn't really quite make sense in terms of like so we're at line 1, right? Because we called Jen Greeter on line 14. We go line 1. Okay, so at line 1 there, I mean I'll just help me write this out. On line 2 we have one parameter, so var student name. What is student name equal to?
Saying Ivan.
Okay, great, Ivan, right? I mean this is we're just calling a function right now, right? Nothing special. We're just calling a function. Okay, great. Okay, so then walk me through the rest from line 3 to line 7.
Okay, then on line 3, we're just declaring Justin's function to be the function which is actually Ivan.
Mhm.
And then if that's invoked, then we would go into it and return hi plus the student name, which would in this case be Ivan.
Okay, so you gave me a hypothetical. Is that happening or not?
I don't think so. Well, maybe, I mean, I guess it is because it like console locked out, but I don't think it is.
I'm asking you to walk me through the function line by line, right? So you said on line 3 we create a variable called Justin's function,
Yes.
and we set it to the value of a function which is actually Ivan.
Yes.
And then you said, oh, but then if we were running it, we would go and do all these things.
Yes.
My question is, are we actually running it
No.
on line 3? Are we running on line 4?
On line 4, we weren't running it.
Are we running the function on line 4? Okay, are we running on line 5? Running on line 6?
No.
Are we running on line 7?
Yes.
Okay, we are.
Well, we're gonna. That's what we did before. We're just.
Are we running it on line 7?
Yes. Well, we are doing line 7. Yes.
No, are we?
We're not running the function. No. We're
Okay,
just-
so let's try again.
Okay.
Okay, on line 3
we're doing something.
well no
we're going
like
to, we're going to return. We're going to perform that action on line 7.
well no, but like what makes it like the reason why I'm kind of making this a bit painful is because I just want to make sure like everyone's like really super like computers are not good with ambiguity, and in fact a computer there is no ambiguity, right? At every single step it's a very binary answer. Am I doing this, yes or no, right? Like it doesn't say like, well in 20 more steps I might have to do this. Like no, computers don't care, right? So at line 3 we create a function. We create a variable called Justin's function, correct? And then we link that to this function which is called actually Ivan. Okay. Now you said earlier like, well if we were running actually Ivan we would then do all these things. My question is, okay, on line 3 are we running actually Ivan?
If we're still going with the line 14 that we originally started on, we are not running that function.
Okay, on line 4 are we running actually Ivan? Line 5?
No.
Line 6?
No.
Line 7?
No.
Okay, great. So let's just not even worry about what we would do if we were running actually Ivan, because we're not running actually Ivan, right? Like, I mean, at no point do we say, yeah, we're running actually Ivan, because if we did, then we would need to go in and figure out what actually Ivan's doing, right? But for now, we're not running it anywhere. So it doesn't really matter what actually Ivan. Actually Ivan could be console logging out like hooray, right? It doesn't matter to us. We never run it. We don't care. Okay? So line 3, line 4, line 5, we define a new variable called Justin function. Line 6 is blank, so we get to line 7. What are we doing on line 7?
Returning the variable of Justin's function.
Okay, and what does that represent?
Function actually Ivan.
Okay, so this is returning actually Ivan, right? Which is a function, right? Are we running actually Ivan?
No.
Okay, cool. We're just returning a function, right? So that's what I'm saying on here. Like that's the second half of the statement here, right? We are returning the actually Ivan function.
Okay. So I understand. So basically, you don't invoke it until you have the parentheses by themselves. But if you have parentheses which have an argument, that is not running it. It's just acknowledging there's an argument being passed in, which is Ivan, which shows on 14 and 15.
No. Oh.
Because 15 is invoking it because it has the double parentheses behind Ivan.
Sure. Okay. So backtrack. I just want to make sure like we're phrasing the question correctly. Okay. Anytime you see a function with the open and close parentheses after it, no matter how many things are in the middle, you're running that function, right? You're just giving it the arguments that it should accept. Okay. Like I guess like Jen Greeter this is running the function. Jen Greeter this is also running the function.
Running the function.
Jen Greeter this is also running the function, right? Why? Because it's Jen Greeter followed by an open, and eventually a closed parentheses. The fact that there's arguments in the middle doesn't change the fact that we're running the function. Is that clear?
It is. So we would one set of parentheses, regardless of whether there's an argument or not within, we're running the top level function. But if we have two levels of parentheses, as shown in line 15.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let's go to line 15 now, right?
Yeah.
So, and the reason why I don't want to kind of because I don't want you to necessarily take one train of thought too far. Kind of let's take it step by step to make sure every intermediary step is super clear, right? So on line 14, so line 14 here I run GenGreeter, right? I pass an Ivan, which essentially is what we do in line 10 here too, right? We run GenGreeter, we pass an Ivan, and then we store it in this variable called greetIvan, right? What is greetIvan?
Would greet Ivan be the function actually?
Yes. Yeah. I wrote it here and also here, but but the idea is that so not to beat a dead horse here, right? But remember how this is what Becky's original question was? Hey, if I don't execute GenGreeter, well, right now greetIvan is equal to GenGreeter, right? Once we do this, greetIvan is equal to whatever GenGreeter returns. And what is GenGreeter returning? The actually Ivan function. Cool. So when we run greetIvan is what again?
Greet Ivan is, well, with the Ivan argument passed in, then it's actually Ivan function.
Well, here's the cool thing, right? Even if I don't pass an Ivan, it's still the actually Ivan function, right? The argument doesn't change anything. Yeah, I can call, hey, if I do that, it's still the actually Ivan function, right? The name of the function is right here. It doesn't care what I call it. That's a function, right? So my argument doesn't matter. Okay, cool. Okay, so greetIvan is the actually Ivan function, right? Which means this is also what? Which is? Okay, great. So when we run this from left, so now let's go to line 15, right, with the double parentheses here. If we execute this from left to right, the first thing I do is I execute GenGreeter, passing an Ivan. What does that get me again? Great. So if I just replace that here, whoa. Now we're invoking what is returned, which is actually Ivan, right? If I literally just replace that with whatever was ran, I now get this. And this hopefully is a lot more clear to everyone. Right? And so this is hopefully a lot more clear about what we're doing now, right? This, you're comfortable seeing. This, you are less comfortable seeing. But if you run it from left to right, they're identical. Right? Because once again, JavaScript runs from left to right, and it returns what it returns to whoever called it. Yep.
We need to set the parameter of actually Ivan. We need to write student name too for it to work.
Yeah. So okay, cool. So this is now going back to the slide that we just pivoted from, right? The slide after this one, which is okay. Well, so first of all, does this make sense, everyone? Good. Everyone's super quick. Okay. Cool. So now, in the following slide, we talk about closure, right? We talk about scope again. So actually, Ivan is now going to run. Okay. Okay. So let's take a look at actually Ivan. Does actually Ivan? Well, let's just make this a little bit more confusing. Let's delete. Everyone cool if I delete this now? Okay. I'll delete this too. Actually, I'll delete this as well. And I'll just write this up. I'll comment out this stuff as well. And I'll write console.log. Let's just do this. Okay. So this way, like, so the only like line where something is being invoked in this entire page is where. Nowhere.
Well, it's being invoked in the console, but it's not being invoked proper.
So the console's for printing things out. The console doesn't do with invoking.
Okay, then it's not being invoked.
So which line on this page is actually invoking a function?
It's not being invoked at all.
No.
The console
Oh.
is invoking it.
The console is invoking it. Okay, yes.
Sure. Okay. Maybe that was okay. So maybe this was a bit too aggressive of like a stretch here. Var foo bar equals that, and let's console log out foo bar. Okay. Now, where on this page is something being invoked?
15.
Cool. Okay. And how many times are we? How many invocations are happening? There's two of them. Okay. We'll tackle it one at a time. Okay. So let's start with line 15. Okay. Line 15. Hey, Jake Reader. I pass in Ivan. What is this equal to? Ashley Ivan. Right? Yeah. We good? Everyone good so far? Okay. Cool. All right. I mean, I don't want to be like redundant with this, but
This is really good.
but let's just put this here, okay, so that we know that these two are the same exact things, okay? Cool. So now we're here, right? Right. This is just equal to this just returns something, right? Inside of here is actually Ivan being invoked anywhere on line by the time we get to line 15. By the time we get to line 14, if you will.
Wait, is what big?
Well, I guess I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut that. I just copy it. Okay. Oof, also bad. Sorry, what I meant to say was like when we like if I just do this, right? It's actually Ivan being run at all on line 14. Oh, sorry, line 15. No, right? Okay. So up until now, like we get to line 15 or 16, identical, right? We haven't run actually Ivan yet, but now we do, right? Because we get here, we say, okay, Jake Reader, we put out Ivan is actually Ivan, great, and now we're executing actually Ivan. Okay. So now for the first time lesson, we're actually going to run what's inside of lines 3 to 5, right? This is the first time we actually care about what's inside of it. Until now, it doesn't really matter. It's a function. We return to you. It could be a number. No one cares, right? Okay. So when we execute actually Ivan, what does actually Ivan take in as a parameter or as arguments? Right. Nothing. Right. This doesn't take it any. It doesn't expect you to give it anything. Which like when we invoke it here, there's nothing there. Right. We say just run. Okay. Cool. So when we run this function now, what happens here? Walk me through line 15.
So now that we've gotten there, we'll get what it returns, which is hi student name, which is within the scope. So we're going to get returned hi Ivan. Is that?
Yeah. So I guess like the point of this part of the lecture is like hey, you know how like we quote unquote created this function here, right? When this function was created, it had access to whatever scope, whatever variables were in that scope, which in this case included this variable called student name. And that's why I can use student name here. It's because it was included, right? It was in that scope. So when I run actually Ivan, to say, okay, great, I take in nothing, great, you gave me nothing, all right, so far so good. I'm going to return back hi plus student name. Well, I don't have a student name variable, right? Do my parents do? Well, who are my parents? Well, my parents is a function I created which is Jake Reader. Does Jake Reader have a student variable? Oh yeah, it does. Okay, great. And when it was created, what was that variable called? Ivan. And so great. So I'll plug in Ivan here, and now Ivan becomes hi Ivan. I'll return that to this line 15 here. I'll store that hi Ivan variable in foobar, and I'll console log it out later. Yeah, guys.
The program does not destroy the function stack until it actually ends, right?
A stack and a function are different. I guess what I would say, like, it preserves the function environment.
So it preserves it.
It preserves the variables. Like the stack is also like it's like a stack is the order in which you call things. We'll talk about
Yeah.
so that does get like destroyed, but like it does preserve like certain environment variables that function has access to stuff. I mean, otherwise we would lose like student name, right? So yeah. Any questions on this? Not
He's,
yet.
like, nervous.
Okay, great.
For every
Yep.
function that we have inside a function, we need a parentheses mark function, right?
Absolutely. It's the same for any function anywhere. You have a function on the page, you need a parentheses to invoke it. Doesn't matter where the function is. You need to invoke it with parentheses. Yep.
Say, for example, okay, on line 3, Dustin's function for return line. What if on line 5 I did a variable Lawrence's function equals, and I made another function there, a whole other thing. It's like it's basically duplicated, Dustin's function and made a second one.
Okay, so I'll call it Dustin's function. Cool. All right.
Let's change actually Ivan to Dustin.
Great. We'll do. All right. Now what?
Okay, now let's run it and see what happens.
Now run.
But can we change the return hi student name to something else? Goodbye.
Sure.
Yes.
Here in Dustin's function. Okay. Goodbye. And then what else?
And now I just want to see what happens if we run Ivan again, or foobar.
Well, we didn't change anything. Like we added an extra variable that never
Right.
got used.
Okay, so now how do I, if I want to invoke Dustin's function instead of Ivan's function on line, I guess, down 19?
Mhm.
That's what I want to try to understand.
Well, you would just return Dustin's function, right?
Okay, so just change there. That's
Oh, that's nice. It's only one letter.
okay.
Ta-da.
Right.
Well, yeah. Goodbye, Ivan. Right.
Right.
Okay. So on the other hand, let's also just for kicks and giggles.
Just because Dustin's function is inside the scope of the David function, right?
Yep.
Alright.
Cool. All right. So now. Oh, okay. So now, actually, Ivan takes in its own argument. I know, mind blown, right? It's a function, right? It can take as many things as you want. So let's go back. Let's get rid of Dustin's function for now, just to make it less confusing. And we'll return Justin's function still. Now, when I execute this, what do I get? Or rather, what do I console log out on line 17 there?
Hi, Ivan undefined.
Hi, Ivan, what?
Undefined.
Almost.
Oh, goodbye undefined. Goodbye.
Yep. Now, if I wanted to, like, so I guess where I'm going with this one is, I was saying like, okay, you know how like this first one took argument, well, the second one can also take arguments, right? So let's say we only have 10 kids, 10 spots in the class, and when Ivan comes, someone has to leave, right? So let's say like like Chris leaves, right? Sorry, Chris. This is how it would look. Whoa, check it out. Really cool, huh?
So the second parentheses is invoking and passing in an argument, whereas before we invoked but did not pass in an argument.
Yeah, well, I mean, a parentheses always invokes and passes in arguments. Even if there's no arguments, it still passes in essentially what boils down to an empty array saying, hey, you have no values. Right? So the way to think about that is that like anytime a function is being invoked, we are passing something in to the function. Even if it's open and closed parentheses with nothing in between them, we're telling the function, hey, we're giving you nothing intentionally. Not by accident, not by whatever, right? I guess what I'm really saying is you cannot invoke a function without passing something in, even if that something is a very intentional acknowledgement that I'm not going to give you anything. It's like you only pass in nulls. You can't pass in undefined. If that makes sense. So that's what that is, right? And I mean, I guess this is kind of nifty, right? Because here we're getting new student from our function that's being passed in right away, and we're getting student name from, once again, our parent function. So it's like, yeah, we could do this too now. Any questions? I mean, this is a rehash of whatever the slide is, so you can take a look at the slide if we want to, but we've covered all the concepts. And then, so I guess, Cass, to your other question then of like the function stack, like I think we call it closure, which is basically a way to remember the environment in which something was created, in case we need to use any variables off that environment. Yeah. All right, we good? Everyone feeling good about this?
This is a weird question. If I were to call closure inheritance, do you feel that I would have that
Very different.
Very different.
Very different.
Very different.
Inheritance means something very specific in
Oh, so
JavaScript.
you don't use that word.
You don't use the word, yeah. Inheritance is for inheriting classes and so it's very different, yeah.
Can you just say a quick example of the closure there? Something that's closure in this example we've been working on?
The variable student name,
Okay.
right? When I call actually Ivan and I use the student name variable, it's not in actually Ivan's scope, but it's in their parent scope. So that's closure, right? The student name variable is in the environment in which it was created and had access to when it was created. Yeah. Oh, actually, I'm just gonna. Okay. So, any more questions before we kind of do a pivot or do a transition? I guess Justin left, so he felt pretty good about the information. So everything we talk about is not true, and all right, cool.